Hello, unstoppable real estate investors. Welcome back to our Unstoppable Real Estate Investor Top 5% podcast every Wednesday at noon Eastern in my group, The Unstoppable Real Estate Investor. And on Wednesdays, we learn from the superstars, the rock stars, people that have made it as a real estate investor. On Fridays, we go to the other extreme and we do a member spotlight podcast at noon Eastern on Fridays for up and coming people in the industry to show that the struggle is real. We want to show both sides of the industry. And then on Mondays at 6 p.m., Rufus Thibodeau and I do a Mindset and Marketing Monday. So that's how you can find us in the Unstoppable Real Estate Investor Facebook group. We post this in over 100 groups. So if you're interested in joining us live, that's how you can do that. With us today, our guest is Mike Cavaggioni. Cavaggioni.
Good enough.
Yeah, say it, Mike.
Cavaggioni.
Cavaggioni. All right. And Mike and I have some things in common. So we're going to just talk a little bit about your background first, Mike. Like,
sure.
Who was Mike pre-real estate investor? And we're going to, just geek out a little bit about our Navy connection. And then we'll get into how you got into real estate and then where you landed and where your specialty is. So tell us a little bit about you pre-real estate.
Sure. So prior to real estate, I was in the United States Navy for 20 years. Actually, got into real estate while I was still in the Navy. I just retired this past December. Don't let the beard fool you. I've been growing it since August. I was on a long transition period where I had the opportunity to grow out my beard. So, but yeah, 20 years in the Navy. That was the main thing I was doing before I really got into real estate.
All right. And what were you doing in the Navy?
So my first 9.5 years, I was enlisted as a yeoman, so basically an administrator. And then I commissioned as a limited duty officer. And that's basically where you get to commission as an officer without having a degree. And you get to, finish up your time. And that's what I did. I finished up my time as an officer, my last 10.5 years, and then retired. And I've deployed several times. I've done a couple different tours. I've done a boots on ground deployment in Iraq as well. So there was some pretty good experiences there. I can get into that could be like a whole podcast episode talking about my military career. So I don't want to get too deep.
Yeah, we don't want to go off the rails there.
Yeah.
So then you said while you were in the Navy, you transitioned into real estate. Tell us why and how.
So I bought my first property in 2007 when I was a young E5 in the Navy on recruiting duty in Waynesboro, Virginia. Now, keep in mind, I bought it in 2007. We all know what happened the very next year, right? So I wound up becoming an accidental landlord because I was unable to sell the property because of how bad the market was. And it was really hard to find a renter. So I worked something out where another one of the recruiters was looking for a bigger place to stay, but for the amount that I could rent the property out for, no matter what, I was going to be losing money. But I said, you know what, at least this helps me hold on to the property a little bit longer. So I rented it out to them and I was losing between $350 to $400 a month, which kind of really stung a bit for a young E5 in the Navy, right? So fast forward a couple of years to 2012, I wound up short selling that property because after I lost my renter, I couldn't pay for that and pay for where I was staying at the time. It was just too much. And I wasn't going to move my family back into that house. So short sold the property, thought I lost my VA benefit. And it was just pretty painful process. Fast forward to 2018, I moved to Hawaii. And in that process, my wife and I figured out how to completely eliminate all of our consumer debt. So get rid of all of our credit cards, all that good stuff. So we paid off all this credit card debt, personal loans and everything before we moved out here and managed to save up about $40,000 in a 2-year span. And we came to Hawaii and we said, okay, we're going to buy another house. And, we want to get another piece of real estate again that we own. That's going to be our primary residence, and that's what
and you're in Hawaii?
Yes. Now, the prices for homes out here are
Yeah.
ridiculously high, but we were in a pretty good spot and we were pretty confident that we can make it happen. So we did. We wound up buying our house out here, and I kind of got this itch going again where I said I was like I want to give this real estate thing a try again. I kind of was an accidental landlord last time. I want to do it intentionally this time. And I kind of went back to some conversations I had with my uncle when I was very young, because he was buying real estate in upstate New York, and he was always telling me about it. He's like, "Yeah, when I retire from the state of New York, I'm just gonna drive around and collect checks between the first and the fifth." He's like, "That's what I want my life to be." I said, "Man, that sounds pretty cool." So I always go back to those conversations. I wound up finding some meetups. I found Bigger Pockets, of course, like a lot of people do. Started listening to that podcast, starting to go into some local meetups out here, meeting people, networking, absorbing and learning as much as I could. And then started looking at like small multifamily back in Chesapeake, Virginia, because I was stationed in Virginia for 15 years. So I kind of knew the market really well. And, I find this duplex, and I ask a buddy of mine who was very experienced as a real estate investor. I said, "Hey man, here's what this looks like. Here's what the numbers look like. Am I crazy, or does this look like a good deal?" He's like, "No, that's a good deal." So now I close on this property I started this whole thing back in November of 2019. I close on this property in February of 2020. So now think about that date, February of 2020. What happened the very
A
next
month
month?
later, COVID. Yeah.
Essentially the world ended, right? So I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, what the heck am I getting myself into again?" I was like, somebody's trying to send me a message that real estate's not for me, right? I said, "You know what? No, I'm going to persevere. I'm going to make it happen." So I had a tenant, lost his job, couldn't pay the rent. That kind of sucked. My downstairs tenant was Section 8, so it was pretty much guaranteed. So I wasn't worried about that. That essentially covered my mortgage and a little bit of other, expenses and my debt service. So I was kind of okay, kind of hanging on. And I wound up finding a program for my tenant that actually back paid all of his rent and late fees. It was a rent repayment program in Chesapeake. So I got all that filled out for him, sent it to him, and said, "Hey man, just sign this and submit it, and you'll be good to go. And you guys don't have to worry about anything." So that was great. And once that happened, it turned out I was cash flowing in that property for about $950 a month, which was fantastic for my first deal. So I was super
Yeah.
excited about that. Um, but during that process, I know I'm long-winded. I'm from New York. I could talk forever. But during that process, I was learning about multifamily real estate, right? I was going to different meetups. I was on a couple Zoom calls and just learning as much as I could from these guys.
You
And
got
during
the
that,
bug.
yeah, yeah. And during that
Yeah.
process, I was like, man, I think I want to get into that because it's a lot more doors. There's a lot, it feels a lot safer, especially in this COVID environment. This feels like a lot safer of an investment. So I wound up selling that duplex, taking the profits from that and getting into my first syndication as a limited partner. And I said, okay, I kind of like this. I want to get into some more.
So for
And
those people that are new and listening
yeah,
to us, talk about what a syndication is and a limited partner versus a general partner. Define that, because a lot of people in this group are newer and they don't understand that. It's a little beyond where they're at.
awesome. And I love that you do that because that is one of the things that gets people to pay attention and really understand and learn like this process, right? So getting into a real estate syndication, like I said, I was learning as much as I could by going to these different meetups and groups. And what I was learning there is how these deals are structured and how the process goes, right? So basically you have these general partners, right? They're the operators. They're the ones that go out and find the deal. They're the ones that find the funding. They're the ones that raise capital for the deal, right? And who are they
They're
raising
the
capital
active
from?
people doing the deal,
Right. They are the
whereas the
active
limited
investors.
partners are like a silent partner, right?
Right. And when they're going out and raising the capital, that's where you come in as the limited partner and you say, "Here, take my money." Right. And what you're doing is you're investing into that. And you actually own a piece of that real estate that you're buying into, right? You essentially get, kind of like shares, right?
You're a
Of
private money lender, but you're also an equity partner,
exactly.
basically.
So, yes.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit better than private money lending, right? Because if you were to
Yeah,
just
'cause
lend
you
them the
get
money, you would
equity.
get paid the interest, right? But yes, you get the equity. And the other thing you get with that is the tax benefit of owning that piece of real estate, right? So when those active investors, those general partners go and do a cost segregation study, you get to benefit from that, right? So when they're getting all of this advanced appreciation and you get to sit here and claim this huge loss on your taxes based off of this investment that you put into it, right? So my very first one, when I got that K1 the next year and I'm looking at this and I'm like, I'm claiming almost an 80% loss on what I invested in this. This is fantastic. And it wound up saving me a lot in my taxes with everything else I had going on. So that is a huge benefit that you get with that. So I really enjoyed that process of getting into it as a limited partner. And I said, I want to do some more. So I went up taking out a HELOC on my primary residence and said, this will work, right? So I started investing in a couple more. I got into 2 more syndications within 2 weeks of each other. A 36 unit and then another 56 unit. I'm sorry, 54 unit. And I kind of got addicted to the process, right? And
So now
yeah,
is everything you're invested in a syndication, or do you actually own 100% any multifamilies yourself? Or
I do.
are you just like, I let someone else do all the work and I'll just be an investor?
Exactly. Because I was, again, like I just retired from the Navy this past December. So while I was active duty, I was extremely busy doing other things, right? So I am completely passive in the multifamily space. And that's what I loved about it, is because it's like, hey,
Yeah,
I can just sit
let
back,
someone
collect
else
my
do all the
dividends.
work, right?
Yep. Yep. And now that I'm
Good for
retired, I'm
you.
getting a little more active in that. So I'm being a
Okay.
little more active as a real estate investor, looking for deals. And I've got my buddies back in Virginia. We actually get on a Zoom call every month and we underwrite deals together and kind of just practice a bit. Because one of them's getting out later this year, he's retiring, and then the other one gets out early next year, and then we're going to kind of go all in with that.
So what you'll do then is you guys will actively be investing in your own multifamilies without it being through a syndication. So
Yeah, we're
then
talking
there's
about
the
our first one being a
aspect of,
JV.
okay, and then there is the aspect of you guys actually going out and doing the footwork, but there's also the property management aspect, and that's so key to being successful. So Alma Solis. Hi, Alma, Richard Bush, Dwayne Kidman, Brad Pettis, Andrew Holder. Alma is asking, how do you get into these syndications?
So there's multiple ways. You can find people online. You can go listen to podcasts. A lot of these syndicators have their own podcasts as well, and they talk about what they're doing. They're very open about it. But what I would do is, go out and find some, join their mailing lists, get the information from them. A lot of times they will provide seminars and presentations where they're going to go over what their next deal looks like, how it's structured. There'll be a slide deck and they go
All
over
right,
everything.
so what she's asking is, how do
Sure.
you find them?
Me personally, I found them at meetups. So I went to
Okay,
different real estate meetups, conferences, things like that.
so networking, strategic
Absolutely.
networking.
Absolutely.
So it's one thing to show up at a meetup and grab a drink and shoot the shit with people, but talk about what your approach has been, where you actually connected with these GPs, the general partners of these syndications, and what your process was once you met one. Walk us through that. These are the things people don't talk about, like that there's a disconnect for someone new like Alma, and Lori Hollis is saying, great, share.
No,
Explanation.
I absolutely love that question, because that's one of the things
Yeah,
that I talk about when I talk about networking is
yeah,
you don't want to just go to these networking events and just
fling
hang
your
out
card around.
and
Right.
yeah, just pass your card around and talk to every single person there. While it's great to quote unquote speed network like that and get as many contacts as possible, you're actually doing yourself a disservice. So my focus when I go to a meetup is I want to meet 2 new people, just two, that I will focus on to build a relationship and stay in touch with. When I first started looking at multifamily, my focus was I want to go find the people doing multifamily. I want to build a relationship with them, and I want to get on their list. I want to get their emails. I want to see what's going on their side of the house. And that's what I did. Like I said, I was going out to local meetups out here in Hawaii. And then, when COVID happened, everything changed to Zoom. So I was trying to find meetups online. So actually I found one on Bigger Pockets. And I reached out to the guy and said, "Hey, can I join your Zoom call? I know you guys are talking about multifamily. I'm very interested." And he sent me all the info. He sent me the link and I started going to it. And guess what? They were the first group of GPs that I invested with. Because I got very comfortable with them. I learned how they did their process and they were very transparent. So I will also say this too, when you're out there trying to pick a GP to invest with, you know, you'll get the slide deck, you'll get all the information from them, right? But you also want to do your own due diligence, both on the GP and on the deal itself. Just because they send you a slide deck with numbers and everything looks fantastic, you might want to make a couple phone calls yourself and just do some research and see what's going on in that area. Is this, particular multifamily unit, is it really renting, a couple $100 below the median rent that these other units are renting out at, right? So is there going to be a lot of value add here? So those are the things that you want to kind of do as an LP to kind of keep yourself safe from those capital calls that they call them, right? A lot of times people get into a syndication and not realize that sometimes they might have to put a little bit more money into it as things go on because, either mistakes were made or underwriting wasn't as great. So it's important to do your own due diligence as
All
well.
right, so here comes another one of those questions you're gonna like.
All right.
So right there's another place people who are new are gonna get stuck because they don't know what to look for. So you've been at this for how many years now? Few years now, right?
Yeah, it's about 3 years now.
Okay. So in that experience, when you're vetting multifamily syndicators, GPs and stuff, what are some pros and cons? What are some must-haves, things look, these are the things to look for. And then these are the things to be aware of, like the deal breakers. Give us a little list there. So it's giving them a little more guidance to be a little more educated on what they're looking for.
Yeah, 100%. Again, love that question as well. So one of the things that I personally want to look out for is, okay, one, how long have you been doing this? Two, how many deals that have you had that went full cycle? So, you bought them, raised capital, did the renovations, raised the rents, got it to its new price point, and then sold it, right? To make it easier for those that are listening, right? That's going full cycle is when you actually get out of the deal, right? Or, did you refinance and pay your investors off to get them out, right? So there's a couple different ways that they will exit their deal, and one of them is to sell the apartment. The other one is to refinance, do a cash out refinance, pay all the investors, and then they kind of keep it in their own portfolio, right? So you want to see like how many of those have they done, and how many of them were successful, right? Just because they got into a deal and went full cycle doesn't mean it was successful. So those are the things that you want to look out for. That's the biggest thing I look out for. Then the other piece is you want to try to get to know those GPs on a personal level and know, like, and trust them, right? Like I was talking about with that networking piece before, when you're focusing on who you want to meet and how much you want to, how much you want to learn, it's the same way that you go and build a relationship, right? You're not going to get everything on that first date.
Yeah,
You
you're
wanna
not
continue to
promoting
court them.
marriage on the first date. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the most important piece is building that relationship, building that rapport, staying in touch and learning as much as you can from that specific GP, and then also learning about all their partners that are in there as well.
Okay. Another question for you. Accredited investor. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So for a lot of those deals, depending on how it's structured, right? You have a 506B and a 506C. A 506C is where you're going to have to be accredited, right? So to be accredited, you have to have a net worth. Right now, the criteria is you have to have a net worth of $1 million or more, or you have to, if you're single, make $250,000 a year, right? And that's how you can be considered, quote unquote, an accredited
And that's
investor.
not including your primary residence.
That cannot include your primary residence. So it's only your investment properties, right? So even though I have a ton of equity in my primary residence, I cannot use that on my personal financial statement to show, whether or not I'm accredited or not.
Well, you can with a HELOC, and you leverage that equity to buy other
Well,
assets.
that was the next thing I was going to go into. So yes, I did take my equity out, and I bought more assets with that. Sorry about that. I just hit the mute button because my dog.
Because it helps you be accredited to be able to do more syndication deals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that I can count. The stuff that I use my HELOC for, I can count.
Excellent. Love it. What else do people need to know? Like, I think a lot of people, the progression, Mike, let me know what you think about this, is they think they've got to start with the basics and wholesale and rehab, and they have to kind of wallow around in that for a while before they're worthy of multifamily. Talk a little bit about the shift in mindset and, how acquiring multifamily and being in syndications, why they don't have to be earning their way through a wholesale or rehab track. Now,
Sure.
It might be that they do, because a lot of times newer investors are doing those two active strategies to build capital, and not everybody has 100K or whatever laying around, and not everybody is meeting the criteria of 250 annual income as an individual, and it's something like, what is it, 500K if it's a couple, so it's, how can people get there faster? All right, hold on. I know I asked you 2 questions. What if your home is paid off? Can you then count that? Okay, so let's answer Tasmia's question. What if your home is paid off? Can you count it that then? No. What you can do though, Tasmia, is pull out equity. What do you do with that equity, Mike?
Go buy more assets.
Buy more assets. Leverage that your house is paid off, Tasmia. Yeah, it's nice the idea of that. I thought when I bought this house, I want it paid off by the time I'm 70, blah, blah, blah. And then, my partner in my micro community development business, we started talking about that, like paying things off to have more cash flow. And he said, we're never going to do that, ever. We're never going to pay our properties off. No, and he started overwhelming me with analytical CPA, brilliant brain numbers. And I went, okay,
Leverage your debt.
Yeah, I got it. But it's leverage. It's leveraging now. So taking equity out of that asset that's paid in full, that is now leveraging good debt to buy an income producing asset. So talk a little bit about that for people who may not be making $250 a year, or how can they get there faster with thinking like that, those kinds of strategies?
Yeah. So in that case, until you get to that point where you're going to be accredited.
Hold on a second.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
Andrew Castine is a partner and a client of mine, and he's like a brilliant CPA brain, like brilliant genius numbers guy. And he's like, in all caps, that's right. Andrew, I love you, honey. Okay.
So before you get to that point where you're accredited, right? And there are multifamily deals that you can get into that don't require you to be accredited, right? Those are the ones that when you actually go to the meetups that they can talk to you about. That's not something that those syndicators can actually go out and advertise, because that's illegal, right? So the only way you can get into those kind of deals is by actually knowing and having a relationship with those GPs, which is why that networking piece that we talked about earlier is so important, right? And this is why I always say this. Look, when you go out to a networking event, try to focus on meeting 2 people and really building a relationship with them. Sure, you could pass out your business card to other people. That's fine. But you want to focus on meeting at least 2 people. And I would say no more than 5 tops, because that would be too overwhelming, right? But if
you're wanting to concentrate your attention on them during the meeting, but you're also want to create a system for following up with them and developing relationships.
And that's another piece too. Even using a CRM system for your relationships is huge, right? Even if you just build an Excel spreadsheet, right? if you keep in touch with some of these people that you've met at these networking events and you remember certain things about them because you're keeping track of it, right? Like you remember that, this individual, their son is in a soccer tournament and they're going up for the state finals, and you give them a call and you say, hey, how did little Timmy do in the tournament? They're going to be like, wow, this guy actually paid attention to what I told him at
Yeah,
that meetup. That's pretty cool.
yeah,
And you build that relationship. So
yeah, because
that's
people want
huge.
to do business with people they know, like, and trust.
Exactly.
What
And then they're going
else?
to bring you into their deals.
Yeah,
So,
what else?
so some of the other things, again, so you have to build up your portfolio to the point where you get to that either $1 million net worth, right? Or you have enough income coming in where you're making 250,000 a year. Now that's the harder thing to catch, right? Because all of us as real estate investors, we're looking to claim as little income as possible with all of our tax incentives, right? So you might have to, for a year or two, maybe not claim as much losses and take all that active income if it's equaling out to
Or yeah,
250,000.
or you get to 1 million in assets.
Right.
It's probably going to be easier to get
Probably
to
going to be
1 million in
easier.
assets than a 200, unless you have a really high paying job and you do
Right.
have a lot of high income producing properties
And
and
now
you're
if you're
not
doing it
taking all the
strictly
tax write-off.
through right, exactly. If you're doing it strictly through real estate, though, if you're at the point where your income is 250,000 a year off of real estate alone, you have a net worth of over $1 million. Like that's easy. Your real estate's already
Especially if
definitely at
you
that
are
point.
also taking all the write-offs you possibly can, because that
Hmm.
means you are grossing 500, 750,000 to get that whittled down. So
100%.
Tasmia wrote, got it, thanks. So Tasmia, you've got like a major asset there that you could leverage. So what are some of the things to look out for to make sure you don't get into a scam? Because there's this, I could see would be a great grift. It would be a great con. So what are some things that you would warn people about?
Yeah, again, so it's no matter what you're doing in real estate, whether it's single family or multifamily or finding partners, due diligence is the most important thing, right?
Do
So you
your
want to do your
homework,
research.
research.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do your homework on the people that you're investing with, right? If you're going to get involved in a group and this is their very first deal and this is your very first deal as an LP, you might not want to do it that way, right? You might want to find the people that are a little bit more experienced. I would also recommend talking to other LPs that have invested with those partners before in previous deals. That was one of the things I did before I got into my first syndication. I asked other people that I knew because we all went to the same meetups, and I said, hey, I know you got in on that last deal with these guys. How did that work? What was the structure? How did it look like? How did you wire the money? Like, these are the things that I want to know, because I'm like, when you wire, $50,000 or $100,000, that's nothing to sneeze at. That's a lot of money. And
And
you want to make sure
you,
you're very comfortable with where
yeah,
that
and
money's
you're not
going.
just wiring it to some guy, you're wiring it to
Exactly.
an escrow account or a title
Yes.
company, right?
Yeah, that's the other piece too, right?
Because that's
It's
a
not
big
going
scam
to a
too.
personal account.
Never.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
The other thing is I'm curious about, so never, ever, ever, ever wire money to a person ever in real estate. If you don't get anything else out of this video, which I hope you do, just don't do that. It should always go into an escrow account or to the title company, title attorney. It just depends how your state does transactions. In North Carolina, where I live, we don't even have escrow companies. The title attorney does everything. Okay, so, all right. So talk about, like, you did your first syndication. How long were you in that deal before you started seeing payments? And were the payments just the passive income of rent of the syndication? And how were you paid? How often? Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, so that's one of the things too that you discuss before you even get into the deal, right? So you look at how they have it structured, you look at what the payment plan looks like, right? So I knew I was going to start getting paid within the first 3 months of them closing on the property, right? Which actually I think it was month 2 is when I got my first distribution. And what happens is basically once they get to the point where everything has settled and they are now paying their debt service, right? They're always going to pay the bank first, then they're going to pay their preferred investors, then they're going to pay everyone else, right? So depending on where you fall in at that structure with how you invested in that, my very first one, I went in as a preferred investor because I wanted to be, guaranteed that I was going to get this percentage. And I use that G word loosely, right? Nothing's guaranteed in any investment, right? But I wanted to be in that first distribution that went out. So that's what I did for my first one. And I started getting paid right away. Well, again, within the first 2 months. The very next syndication that I went into, I didn't get paid for the first 4, almost 5 months, and they pay quarterly, right? So it all depends on how those distributions are set up. So every quarter now I get paid, and it would average out to be, it's actually averaging out to be a little bit more than what my other ones getting. If you were to look at it
And
monthly
you're
for the
getting it in
distribution for the
bigger
same amount of money.
chunks. Yeah, you're
Right,
getting it in
right.
bigger chunks. Yeah.
So those are always nice. Every quarter when I get this nice fat paycheck that hits the account. And actually what I do with it right now is I dump it right back into my HELOC. I take everything that I make and I dump it back into my HELOC. So yeah, so that's the way that one went. And then my third one, I started getting paid about the same, about 2 months into it. But then also we ran into some issues when we had the lumber shortage and all that other stuff while they were in the middle of renovations on that deal. And we actually had to go 2 months without distributions, right? But that was better than having to do a capital call, if you ask me, right? So they didn't have to ask for more money. They just said, hey, we need to take some of this extra rent, profits that we're getting, and we have to put it towards the lumber because the cost increased so much. So I was okay with that because I didn't have to go and give them another, $25,000 to $50,000.
All right. So explain capital calls for people that aren't really savvy about multifamily syndications.
Absolutely. A capital call is something that happens when either the team made a mistake, underestimated something, or just something happened and they require more money to get an issue fixed, right? So a capital call is where they will go back out to the investors and say, hey, investors, appreciate you being
Oops.
with us. Yeah, but oops, we messed up. We either undervalued this or we're not able to raise rents as fast as we thought we could, or there was an issue with the renovations that we're doing, or the lumber's costing a lot more than we expected it to, different things like that. There could be a multitude of reasons why, but the main reason or the main thing that you need to understand about a capital call is they're asking for more money. Now,
Okay.
usually whenever there's a capital call, it also means that your return on investment is going to be a little, well, not a little, it could almost get cut in half depending on how much you have to give, right? Because you're not getting interest back on the money that you put in on that capital call, right? You're still going off your original investment. The way they usually structure it though, is that when they do sell the asset or they do refinance and pay everybody back, you'll get your initial investment back and what you put in for the capital call. Okay. So you're usually going to get that back unless things really like crap really hits the fan. You should still be all right. If there's a deal that has to do more than one capital call, probably not in a good deal at all. So be very careful with that.
So Nanette Henry's joined us. Hi, Matt Marinoff. They've joined us. She wrote, it's always on the contract disclosure that nothing's guaranteed. Let's get to the negative scenario. How do you structure getting paid when the real estate business went down? Not looking into that, but just in case.
Sure. So, well, that actually happened, during this whole process. Like I said, in one of those deals, the cost of lumber was so high, and there was a shortage too. There's a supply chain shortage, so a lot of renovations and construction had to stop. Like it just completely stopped. And what happened is those units that were being renovated are not rentable because they're completely in shambles, right? So those are the kind of issues that you run into. And that was the only real thing that I had to experience in any of my deals. So I haven't had the luxury or the pain of having to do a capital call. Thank goodness. I'll knock on wood, right? But I know others that have. I had a buddy of mine reach out to me and said, "Hey, man, I got into a deal with so and so, and now they're asking for a capital call. They're asking me for another 50,000. Like, what happens if I don't give it?" And I said, "You got to go back and read the contract and see what it says." Um, Worst case scenario, you're gonna be pulled out of the deal. Best case scenario, you get your money back and that's that. So I said, you got to go back and look at the contract. So that's a very good point. Always read the contract, always read the fine print. There's always fine print in any contract that you sign, whether it's for real estate, whether it's you're buying a vehicle, it doesn't matter. There's always fine print. So make sure you read that fine print. Make sure you fully understand what you're getting into.
So let's say along those lines, you do want to pull out of a deal. Worst case scenario, best case scenario. Best case scenario is you just break even and walk with your initial investment.
That is the best case scenario, right? So
Yeah,
usually though,
worst case
when
scenario.
you're worst case scenario, you're stuck, right? For the most part, when you get into a syndication, you are committed to that deal for the next 3 to 5 years, depending on how long it takes for
Okay,
that asset to
whatever the
mature.
contract agreement
Yep,
is. Okay,
100%.
all right. Anything else you can think of? Any other questions? Thanks for the questions. I love the engagement today, everybody. So any other questions before we shift gears? And what I want to ask you is, what's been the biggest challenge for you as a real estate investor? What's been the hardest thing that you've gone through?
That's a great question. And honestly, I can say it was figuring out how to manage my time, especially when I was first getting started into this. It was, still being on active duty, and I was working like 12-hour days. It was pretty rough, and still wanting to invest in real estate and still wanting to get out to these meetups. And for me, the hardest thing was actually making the time to do this. There was a lot of nights where I was just like, okay, I'm probably just not going to sleep tonight because I have to research this investment that I want to get involved in, right? So that would probably be one of the hardest things that I had to do was
You mean the
figure out that
hardest
time.
thing is you have to work?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of people, you get into it and you're like,
You
oh,
people
I want
sign
to get
up
into
for
real
like a
estate so I don't have to
Fortune
work anymore.
Builders or a Pace Morby, and they think, okay, through osmosis, I'm going to be a successful real estate investor. I've
Yeah.
coached people who are students in both those, Pace Morby sub 2 and also Fortune Builder students. And I'd marvel at people spending 50K, 10K, 20K, and then not dive into any of the material, not study it, not learn it, not do it. It's like, it's not going to just happen. You've got to do the work.
Yeah, you can't buy your way into it, right?
No,
You
you
can't sit
can't.
here and throw money at a problem and say, oh, it's going to get better. It's like the dollars are going to be band-aids. That's not how it works. You have to put in the work. And I think that was one of the hardest lessons learned for me too. Is like, because I kind of went into it with that whole thing too, like, oh, I just buy some real estate and collect rent, and that can't be too bad. And then when I bought that duplex in Chesapeake, right, and then COVID happened, there was a military travel ban. I couldn't fly out there, so I'm doing everything sight unseen with a contractor out there. He's sending me pictures. I'm getting phone calls at 2:00 in the morning because I'm in Hawaii and something happened at 7 a.m. there. They're getting ready for work and their toilet exploded or something. I'm getting a call at 2 in the morning. I'm like, oh my God. So, because I was trying to manage it myself too. So it's like, oh, I could do this, is easy. I can do this. Oh my goodness. That's one of the reasons why I was like, I need to figure out how to build a team. Right. So definitely the work aspect, you have to put in the work 100%.
And there's the other point, and then we're going to wrap up here soon because I have another special edition podcast right after this with the owner of Privy, Benson Juarez. Anybody who's using Privy or interested in learning more about that, having a lot of data, not just MLS data, but Privy is a phenomenal SaaS tool. It's a phenomenal tool for really learning even more about on and off market and comps and all that. So Benson will be joining us right after this podcast. So that's another point right there is, if you had a rooftop message. You know, something that you could shout from the rooftops for everyone to hear and heed. And you had a captive audience and you could just get this advice in them and they would take it. What would that advice be?
So I would shout out, because I have what I call these 4 pillars to building wealth, right? And I would say that this is what you need to focus on. Number 1, education. Learn about the specific thing that you want to get involved in, right? That would be, you know, doing one of those programs if you want. I don't think I would spend $50,000 on a program, but some people do. That's fine. Educate yourself, right? Take courses, learn about it. The next thing is mentorship and coaching, right? I'm a firm believer in mentors. I'm a firm believer in coaches, and know the difference between the two, right? A mentor is somebody that you can go to and say, hey, I got a problem. I need to talk to somebody about it. A coach is somebody that says, hey, get off your butt and go get this done. Okay.
I'm a
So-
coach.
Exactly. So know the difference between the two.
Yeah.
Usually mentorship's free, coaching usually costs money, right? So that's another way to differentiate it. The third thing, networking and building relationships, and know the difference between networking and building a relationship, right? So that's the third big one. And then the fourth one, which is the most important one, because the other 3 don't even matter if you
If
don't
you're
do
not
this,
doing this.
is take action.
Yeah. You're singing my song, babe. My whole tagline is take action, no excuses, just results. Love it. Well, is there anything we didn't cover that just one more Hail Mary before we wrap it up?
No, I think we got everything pretty covered. I also have a podcast if people want to check that out. So
Okay.
yeah.
When we're done here, go in my group. If you haven't join and find this in the live stream and add any links you want if you want anybody to, you know, connect with you.
Absolutely.
So that, okay. Well, Mike, gosh, what a pleasure. It's been really great. I've learned a lot from you today. I love what you're doing, love your attitude. It's been a pleasure having you. We had some great engagement today. This is going to get posted in over 100 real estate investment groups, so that'll be nice exposure for you. Let's stay in touch.
Absolutely.
And I'd love to just hear how things progress for you.
Yeah. Go Navy.
Go Navy. All right. Bye,
Take care.
everybody. We'll see you in about 15 minutes for Benson Suarez. Benson Juarez is one of the owners of Privy, and he's going to be talking about Privy and a challenge, a kickoff he's going to be doing starting next week. So please join us if you're interested in an easier way to find data and learn more about the market. Thanks, Mike. Bye, everybody.